Our next guest may have a somewhat unique perspective onto both sides of this. Former presidential candidate and, of course, former Hewlett-Packard CEO Carly Fiorina joins us now. Carly, nice to see you. Give me your take, of course,
Great to be with you.
You're welcome. Having run a multinational, what you'd be doing now, how do you view something like this in terms of the increasing costs of tariffs that the U.S. would argue are much needed in terms of our trying to seek fairness from the Chinese?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a reminder of a couple things, David. First of all, tariffs are not paid by the Chinese. Tariffs are paid by producers and ultimately consumers. And that's what these thousands of companies, in addition to Tesla, are saying. We're paying the freight here. It's why I've always said I don't find tariffs a very effective tool for effective trade policy. Secondly, it's a reminder that in order to deal with the Chinese, and the Chinese need to be dealt with, we need to have a consistent, persistent strategy where business and government are aligned. Because this suit of businesses against the Trump administration serves China's purposes, not our purposes. The Chinese will seek to exploit every division, and this is certainly a very public division.
You know, it's also interesting, of course, the back and forth that is going on regarding TikTok, which is sort of part of this larger conversation about our relationship with China. You know, I'm curious in your experience, and obviously you did quite a few deals as a CEO in your time. What is your take on how the Trump administration has been so deeply involved in sort of structuring a transaction that would involve ByteDance's TikTok?
Yes. Well, first, let me just elaborate for a moment. The reason we need to be consistent and persistent and strategic in order to deal with China is because they are. The Chinese have been very explicit about their goals, and they've been consistent and persistent in pursuing those goals. They wanted to be the #1 manufacturer in the world, the #1 technology provider in the world, and the #1 military power in the world. And they are making huge progress on all three. They've achieved the first one. And so they must be dealt with. But if business and government aren't aligned, we won't deal with them effectively. And by the way, if we're inconsistent, which the Trump administration has been, we're not going to be effective either. In fact, I would dare to say that Chinese policy, our Chinese policy, needs to be consistent between Republicans and Democrats, business and government, and from administration to administration. I realize that's a very tall order in these polarized and short-term times. It is extraordinary that the Trump administration is this involved in a deal. On the other hand, I would be, the Chinese government is that involved in the deal. I'm not very optimistic about it. I'm surprised in a way that it's gotten this far because my prediction, I could well be wrong, but my prediction is that the Chinese will never permit the fundamental underlying technology to be transferred to the United States. And so the deal will fall apart ultimately.
I wonder what you're talking about consistency across political parties and from administration to administration. How about just within the Trump administration, consistency even from day to day within a single week? What is the impact of not only the inconsistency of message here, is it a sale versus is partial ownership okay, et cetera, but also the fact that there's been no effort that I can see to establish an overall rule for what happens to the data of U.S. citizens. Instead, it's this point engagement about this particular company and this particular software code.
You're absolutely right. You're right in every single one of those comments. And not only has the Trump administration been completely inconsistent with regard to this particular deal, but they've been inconsistent with regard to China in general. I mean, Trump and Xi were best friends. Remember Arabella, Grandpa Xi, just several years ago. And now we have the Chinese virus and a trade war and all the rest. Every time we are inconsistent, the Chinese gain, because the Chinese are incredibly consistent. And the Chinese government and Chinese businesses are not only co-owned and co-opted, but they're always aligned. And so every time we change our minds or we don't seem to know what we're doing or there's division between business and government, every time the Chinese gain because they're clear about what they're trying to achieve, and we lose in our relative position. And we ought to be concerned about that.